today. This is the March installment of our webinar series, and we're very excited to have you join us once again. The webinar today will run until 12:45. However, we will be available till 1 o'clock should you have any questions. If we don't get to your question by the end of that time, definitely feel free to reach out to us anytime you like. You're also welcome to use the chat window during this webinar, and we will do our very best to get to everyone's questions should you have any. So for those of you that aren't as familiar with us at Easy Swimmer Group, we have been around since 2000. We've been leading training seminars and coaching and consulting since that time, and we're actually the first Canadian organization to offer Lean Six Sigma certification. So our passion and our goal is all about efficiency and helping individuals and organizations become the most efficient they can possibly be and reduce waste and just really excel and be leaders in their industry. So today, the webinar is going to be on problem statements, and it is facilitated by Jeff Woods. Jeff Woods has a wealth of experience in all different industries. He's our primary facilitator for our public training programs. Some of you are joining us next week for that. He has also been instrumental with a lot of our corporate clients in getting them on the process excellence path and helping them to achieve success. So I have no doubt that you are going to enjoy listening to Jeff. He's got a wealth of information and he's a fantastic facilitator. So at this point, I'm going to ask everyone once again, please mute your speakers or your phones just so that we don't have any background noise distracting from when Jeff is speaking. And Jeff, I'm going to hand the mic over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Liz. And welcome everyone to this session. As everyone's aware, this is on problem statements. And so we want to kick it off. Again, appreciate everybody taking the time to be here today. And we look at problems and we look at what's going on in our business, it's an interesting place to start, because often we're sitting there going, oh, there's a lot of things we need to fix, or if we've got a problem over here, let's just go and work on it. And we really want to step back and start with a great problem statement. And that allows us to do a couple of things. The first one is allows us to think about, well, what's the problem we're trying to solve? Like, what's the actual issue that we're having? And can we articulate that in such a way that we can understand it and start to get our arms around how we would approach it? So if we think about the slide that's up now, and for those that have been in the training courses in the past, we're looking at an issue where this person's role is to take the eggs from the hen and put them in the carton. And you can see that they have lots of rework and lots of errors, or in this case, cracked eggs. And what they've done is they've automated the Band-Aid process. And what we want to do is ideally we want to eliminate the errors from happening in the first place. So in our problem statements and as we look at our issues, we would want to step back and think about how do we stop the eggs from being cracked in the first place. And often we find that, though, is that we start to look at what are the symptoms, and we fix the symptoms rather than looking at the root causes and fixing the root causes. And so that can start in our problem statement, taking a look at what's the problem we're trying to solve, and making sure that we aren't trying to improve the Band-Aid solution, but we're trying to poke a yolk or eliminate the errors from happening in the first place. As I stated, it's not always easy to identify what that real problem is. Often, what we recognize are the symptoms that are out there. We sort of see the impacts of the pain, or we jump and blame an area, department, or person, or else we look at the causes of it, and we just jump to solution. And what we really want to do is, in the beginning of our methodology of thought, thinking back to define, measure, analyze, improve, control, we really want to define, well, what's the problem I'm trying to solve? So what's the real issue that we're looking at? And for us, we've developed a simple tool the 5W2H that allows us to take a look at things. So if we think about our problem statement and what we want to start to understand, it starts with, what's the gap? What's the gap between? So if we say we have an issue somewhere, well, when we're saying we have an issue, what's the gap between how the process is currently performing versus how it's supposed to perform? And we want to start to quantify that gap between those two things. And what that implies is that we actually know how well it's working today and how well it's supposed to work. So do we have metrics and measures around our processes? And are we able to measure to know what that gap looks like? So by going through the thought process, it also can highlight areas that we need to perhaps go and collect some data and get a better understanding of the impact of the process. So we really start from the problem statement, understanding that gap between how well it's working and how well it's supposed to work. And then as we work through it, we can think about, if we have the gap, then we want to think about time frame, location, and trend. Describes when and where the problem was first observed, what kind of trend it's following. The impact quantifies the gap. So what critical two are we looking at? So when we look at that gap in our process, are we thinking about, is it taking too long? Is it costing too much? Critical to cost or critical to delivery? Is it critical to quality? Is it around our rework? Is it critical to health and safety? What is the issue that we're trying to fix? And so when we look at that gap, how does that relate to what the problem is that we're trying to solve? And then we can take a look and think about priority around, why should we care? What's the impact to the organization of making this change? And the better that we can quantify and understand that, then the more powerful our problem statement can become and the more compelling the reason for actually doing something about it. Sorry, my screen is just frozen here. So I mentioned before how we like to take a look at this is our 5W2H method. Again, because there's 5 questions that start with W, 2 questions that start with H, so very literal. And going back, it really kind of takes you through that of what's the problem? Why is it a problem? Highlighting the pain. Where do we observe the problem? What locations, what products, who's impacted? So what's the impact to either customers, businesses, functions, etc.? When did we first observe it? How did we observe it? So what are the symptoms? What are we seeing? And then how often do we observe the problem? So starting to think about the quantification and the impact, the priority of why work on this and not something else. So it helps as we're building up and trying to prioritize our projects, that problem statement can be that first building block in really understanding, should we look at this now or later, and how does it relate to other issues that we're having in the organization? I'll take you through an example of, what's the problem we're trying to solve. So in this case, it's a call center example. We have diminished experience for our clients and our staff. So what we're experiencing, some of the issues how we're seeing that is through complexity, effort and time spent, the administrative overhead of our processes. And we take a look at, well, why is that a problem? What's the pain? What are we seeing? And so we're seeing it through our call length, the variability in our call length when we're talking to customers. We're experiencing through lower service levels, and those service levels can be, how that's impacting staff and their service levels and impacting our customers and what they're experiencing. So we're really trying to sort of break down and understand the issue that we're having. Where do we observe the problem? In this case, on all of our calls. And where that breaks down again is through the complexity of the calls, the training levels and experience of our staff, the volumes that are coming in, who's impacted. When we look at that, we're understanding, the impact to our clients, the impact to sort of background behind our clients, the employers, our staff. We can sort of really see how all the various pieces of the business are impacted. And what we really want to do is start to draw that line to, when we're looking at priority in the next piece, it's how they're all impacted and how a delay in one area can then impact the next step in the process and who's impacted there, and which can impact the next step in the process. So really trying to understand the downstream and upstream impacts of the piece of the process that we're looking at. So it really helps take us through and understand what the process looks like. It really is kind of that first step in how we want to look at things. And so we start with, well, what's the problem? What are we experiencing? And ideally, this is something in your organizations that you're pulling out of and understanding either through metrics and how you're measuring the processes that are going on, or you're getting it through meetings with staff where they're talking about what kind of issues that they're having and some of the challenges they're having around delivering excellent service. It can come from the voice of the customer, where you're having customers call in, and whether they're complaining or it's feedback that they're giving to the organization around the challenges that they're having with dealing with our company. And that's what's really important. We need to be making sure that at all times that we are accessing those various voices, whether, again, it's the voice of the customer, voice of the process, and we need to make sure we have in place ways that we are able to know what the impact is, whether it's to our customers, to our staff, to our processes up and down and through our organization. Going back through the two H questions, how do we observe the problem? What are the symptoms? Again, in this case, where we're seeing the call handling times and our wait times, ambiguity, all of the impacts, what's making it difficult for our staff to deliver excellent service. And often what one will observe is that you have, a great company with great staff, but our processes aren't great around that and are making it difficult for us to deliver the service that we want to. So we want to make sure that our processes are enabling our staff to provide excellent services to our customers. And the last one, how often do we observe the problem, error rate, magnitude? And this is an interesting one, because if you look at how this has been written up, it talks about, we've always had a little bit of an issue, but we're seeing it's getting worse with call complexity related to changes in knowledge programs that perhaps as an organization that you're delivering, changes in the clients and what the clients are expecting, legislation, etc. And that really relates back to an interesting point, that one thing that you're going to find is that processes are rarely designed poorly. And when we set them up based on current circumstances. The processes don't necessarily age well. And what we find often is that, what worked once is that slowly over time, we just add extra steps. We have rework in our process, the actual reality of what we're trying to deliver. So that box of what we do versus the box of what the customer is looking for, that sort of diverts from each other over time. So when the voice of the customer, what the customer wants, starts to deviate from the voice of the process and what we're delivering, then the capability of that process starts to lower. And so we really want to be able to go back and to realign those two relationships of what the customer is looking for and what we want to be delivering and how we deliver that service. And the better that we can align those two things, then the greater ability as an organization that we can be giving the right service at the right cost, because we're delivering what the customer is looking for. And so we want to always be coming back and aligning that. So that's why we find problems in the first place, when we start to see that there's a divergence between what the customer is looking for and our ability to deliver that service. And that's why when we start to look at processes, often when we kind of open it up and look inside, we go, holy crap, I can't believe what we're doing, pardon my language. But often we'll sort of see there's a whole lot of issues around what we're actually delivering versus what we think we should be delivering, or the value that the customer is looking for out of that process in the first place. So on that journey of an improvement, that first step of what's the problem I'm actually trying to solve and what does that look like is really, really important. And then, so in the define stage of your project, really recommend that the first thing we look at is thinking about that problem. And easy for me to say here today, but often that's a real challenge, because often, the problem comes up when we have a real issue. And so there's a fire to put out. We just need to fix it today. Let's not think about why it's happening. Let's just fix it, and then we'll move on. But we'll come back to it. Reality is we don't come back to it. So what we want to do as much as possible in our first steps of looking at things is really step back and think about what's the problem I'm trying to solve? What's the issue that we actually are trying to look at? Let's fix it once correctly versus fixing it many times incorrectly as we go forward. A couple of things when we're wrapping ourselves around that. Again, when we're thinking about that defined stage of our project, we really want to be stepping back. So when we work through it, through the 5W2H, often, not always, but often what you'll find is you get to the why is it a problem? And you start to realize, oh, what I thought was the problem was really just a symptom. And you need to start the process all over again, or just go back and rethink your problem statement. And that's actually a good thing, because you'd rather kind of hone in and think about what's the problem I'm trying to solve day one versus day 100. Because once in your organization, once you sort of decide what you're fixing, then all of a sudden the organization gets into it, well, how do we fix it? Not whether it's the right thing to fix. And so that, once we're going to work on something, now we've got teams that are putting project plans together. We've got IT who's looking at tools and that they can be implementing. You've got your project management office looking at, how do we put BAs and how do we resource this project? And so now we're starting to work through to completion, but we're not necessarily working through to fix the right thing. So again, kind of reinforcing that thought of making sure that as much as possible, you step back in day one, think about what's the problem I'm trying to solve. And as we go through that, on this slide, as we think about it, once we've created that problem statement, we want to reflect back and how do I verify and validate the issue? And that can lead to some quantification around metrics. Maybe we have to go and collect some data. The better that we can quantify the problem that we're looking at and quantify the impact of the improvement, then the easier it is for the organization to decide that it's worth doing something about it. So we really want to up front make sure that we are thinking about what's the problem. Have I articulated that problem out to the point where I really know what it is that I think that we want to look at? Again, this is not about fixing it. This is about knowing where we want to look to find out what the root causes are that we're going to then fix. And once we have that good problem statement, which could have come from metrics, it could have come from data that's coming in, it could be coming from team meetings that you're holding with your staff. You then want to look at, well, where would I get that champion support? Whenever you're working on something, whether it's a small Kaizen local event or a larger enterprise project, you always want to make sure that you've got good alignment up through the organization. So who would that champion be that you're working with that can support the change, that can support eliminating roadblocks around whether it's staffing, whether it's resources, whether it's change? You want to make sure that you've got that good alignment with your champion. The initial information that you're collecting can help you complete your charter. And again, if it's a small project, it might be, you might spend 10 minutes kind of going through the questions on your charter. If it's a large project, you may be spending, a number of days working through what that journey is going to look like. But regardless of whether it's a small project or a large project, we still want to do it efficiently, effectively, and we want to make sure that whatever change we put in place, we can sustain. So it doesn't really matter whether it's a small improvement or a localized improvement or a large improvement and an enterprise improvement. We still want to make sure that we do it correctly, go through the same thinking of define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. Still want to go through that thought process. It's just that the amount of effort and time and tools that I use changes. Because again, to sort of repeat myself, but we want to make sure that no matter what the change is, that we're doing it as efficient and effective as possible and that we can sustain it. Just because it's a small change doesn't mean we're going to do it poorly. But that's something that often happens, that we don't put the thought into it because we think it's, well, that's an easy fix, so I won't really put the thought into it. And then we realize that maybe we fixed the wrong thing. So we want you to sort of step back, and the problem statement, I think, is a beautiful way to start the journey when we think about what problem we're trying to solve. And as we go through that, the next question, once we know the problem, is what process does that problem live within? And so then we take a look at, well, if I'm looking at what process it is, I would create the SIPOC, my supplier input process output customer, and do a quick sketch of what that process looks like. And that really helps us determine scope and the team that's needed to work on the process. So these are the initial tools that roll out of it. So when we're solving that problem, take a look at putting these initial pieces together. And those are often I'm doing this with the champion. This is kind of us determining kind of where we want to move forward, then starting to bring the team together so that we can start our journey. Again, so that we're set up correctly. We want to make sure we have the winning conditions in place, other tools which aren't a part of this, but this could lead into a change readiness assessment and the other tools that really help us set ourselves up for success. And that's really what we want to look at. So that quickly took us through the various tools about thinking about the 5W2H and problem statements. Again, I find that often people are anxious, or organizations more so. The organization's anxious to say, where are we at? Have you started to fix that yet? Where are the results? And that people jump into solutioning and don't take the appropriate time on the define and measure stage and analyze stage. So that first define stage is something that can really set yourself up for success. Make sure you have the winning conditions in place so that you can be effective and do it and have your projects work out successfully. So that's why we wanted to talk about problem statements today. Really important tool and one that really sets itself up. So that kind of concludes the walkthrough portion of today. And at this point, before we come to any questions or anything else, I just want to sort of throw this back to you, Liz, for a little bit.
Sure. Thank you very much, Jeff. For those of you that where this isn't so much of a review, but more new information, if you are interested in diving a little bit deeper or just have some questions, you're welcome to reach out to us anytime, phone, email. We do offer different training programs. For instance, next week we're starting the in-class portion of the open enrollment continuing education courses that we offer. They do include some e-learning and in-class training. There's always e-learning courses available if you prefer that. We also offer some on-site training and coaching, but Like I said, if you just have some questions, or if you're currently working on a project and working through your problem statement and just want us to take a look at it, definitely feel free to reach out anytime. We want all of you to be successful, so we are happy to share some of the knowledge that we've gained over the years. So if you want to reach out, there's info@easysigmagroup.com as well. You guys would have all received emails from me personally. You can always reach out. Future webinars that we have coming up, the next one is in April. We're going to be talking about 5S and 6S events. Great events. I actually just 5S'd our basement and all of our tools, so it's something that you can use at home and at the office. Please note as well for May, there may be a date change, so just keep your eyes out for that. And I'm going to open up the floor now to anyone that has any questions.
And as you do that, Liz, just want to reinforce something that you just said, which is anyone ever wants to reach out and has a question. I know that anyone who's attended any of our training already knows this, but if you ever, as you're working through things, have a question or something you want to discuss, we are always here. That's our role. Part of our goal is to really promote continuous improvement in all industry and all areas. So please, if you ever have a question, reach out to Liz or through information, and you can get a hold of me. Many of you already have my email address, and I do hear from many of you from time to time. So just reminding you that that's always something that's there for you. Liz mentioned around questions, so what we can do is we'll just wait for a pause. People don't have to come on the phone and say, no, I don't have a question, no, I don't have a question. We'll let it go for a minute to see if there's, if anyone asked anything, and we'll take silence as you're good for today. And so we'll just give it a moment before we finish off and close up for the day. So Liz, do you want to just sort of finish things off then?
Yep. So thank you once again. Everyone, you will be receiving a follow-up email with a copy of this presentation deck, just as a thank you for attending. If you, again, want to sign up for future webinars and haven't already registered for the full series, send me an email. And again, if there's anything that we can do to help, reach out anytime, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you for joining us.